now is because, in resistance to the federal government. But, I've spent a lot of time in the archives, and because I really wanted to get access to those papers, and I found documents where, in fact, you probably know that they refer to the expulsion as evacuation. It's a very common term. And in the community, we've tried to come up with, what can we call it, right? Because we're caught, with this language, right, that's been imposed on us. And even in the documents, I found a document reprimanding an official of the federal government for using the term concentration camp. Because if you can imagine, into the 1950s, 1960s, this one person actually had to write to the government to get a reference for a job, right? To prove that this period of his life he was actually somewhere, whatever the government called it, because that gap was on his resume, right? So he wrote to the federal government, and I found the letter because the official wrote back saying that this man was actually in a concentration camp in the BC interior, and he was strongly reprimanded for using that term. And they were, I saw other documents saying you cannot call this concentration camp, you cannot call this internment camp. So the way the language itself was policed, and what I talk about in my own work is how we've inherited this language. And we use it as like survivors and children of survivors, and how we struggle with it because it was imposed on us, and we ourselves, and I continue to be in different, especially academic venues, reprimanded and policed for using terms that are considered inappropriate to describe atrocity, right?
It's amazing, like resistance cannot be named. And that gets totally disappeared. And if you start to use real language, one of the other things that happens is the simplicity of language. So people always say to me, well, you can't just say, we took all their stuff, we stole it, we sent them places that they didn't live, and we destroyed communities. They're like, well, that takes so long to say. And it's like, yeah, because we have an obligation to speak truth. And so that just takes a bit longer. Noam Chomsky talks about this. We can't answer in sound bites because we're not trying to sell you Coca-Cola. This is more complex. And if we're going to pay attention to justice, then this is what Bell Hooks says, right? Segregation's really easy. Put everything, you want to start to work together. Now it's going to get messy. This is going to take a bit more time, and we're going to have to sit down and actually talk to each other. And I think, the purposefulness for me of language, it really matters to be able to name something for what it is. And then once you name that, you have to find out, okay, who's the agent of that? Who did that on behalf of who? It starts to invite some questions. And the other thing I think in both the case of Japanese communities and First Nations communities is how insidious it is to, if you're sending your kid to residential school, who doesn't want their kid to be educated? Right? You're an idiot to resist. Who would resist that? A bad parent would resist that, right? You're going to resist the state kidnapping and potentially killing your child, yet now you are a decent parent. So it's really important that we use this language because it matters all the way down the line.
Mm-hmm. And our parents were told that as well. One of the ways that they got their parents to let their kids go to the school was because they're going to get educated into the white man's way. You're going to learn the language and be able to, and all the successes that come with that, So that was how when I used the word, I'm not sure if I used it in this article in the magazine, but coerced to go to the school, that was one of the ways, and what they would learn, and they would learn a trade, but not knowing that they were just going to be used, basically as slaves to to make the money. But and just in case, I'm not sure if you read the article, but I am a victim of sexual abuse at the school. And I call it abuse because, and it was also, actually, I also say the word assault, sexual assault, and rape. I use those words, which is something that isn't used a lot, but I thought I might as well put the real shit in there because, it's a big cause of why I'm in therapy and why I've been celibate now for 5 years to work on myself. And but also, it's caused for a lot of I think anyone that has suffered, like a sexual assault or molestation or a coercive molestation growing up, it does affect who you are. But I'm very thankful because even though my mom went to residential school as well, my mom was a very strong person, and and how we ended up there was that there are native workers there now, and but she still, it was still the time where we had to go. The parents are forced to have their kids go, but she did try to fight it. But they told her that there are native workers there now, and and my mom experienced all the other stuff, but she wasn't sexually abused, which is a big topic now because one of every other First Nations person that attended the school was sexually abused at some point, and it's a big positive for our men and our women. At Cuba Island, I can only speak for that school, but a lot of our men, young boys, the older boys, were sexually abused and raped by nuns as well. And there was one of the nuns, I was really shocked. She was very pretty and very nice to us girls, and we loved her. But not knowing that what she was doing to on the boys' side, they call it, and and it's part of why I wrote a piece. I don't know if we have time later, but I wrote a piece about that, about how our women are seen, but it's a big part of why there are a lot of problems on reserves now. Why there's a lot of problems on the streets and in families, because we don't know how to to be with our families. And I was afraid to become a parent because I didn't want to be a monster and a bitch to my kids, and how would I handle them. But I read books. I had like books on parenting. I watched a video. I joined groups, the Young Parent Support Services, when they came about, because I wanted to be a good parent. I wanted to be someone who could talk to my kids and apologize when I did something wrong. And I learned that. I'm sorry, I just had such a bad day. I learned to apologize, and anyway, I'm going off to another thing.
Can I jump in before we leave this?
Okay.
Which is about sexual abuse, which in terms of language and violence, which is what I study. Sexualized assault or sexualized violence is way more accurate. This is about a way of being violent and beating somebody up with a piece of anatomy versus a different kind of weapon. So it's really important to name that. But I also think it's really important when these stories are told that we often have stories of victims and survivors. And one of the things it does, it leads us to, we are led to think in our culture, in this society, given the way these stories are covered, that a couple of priests or a couple of religious people lost the plot and behaved poorly. And Gord Hill was just here earlier talking about the histories of colonization and the histories of assimilation all over the world. The Canadian government went to South Africa in the 20s and 30s, and we helped design apartheid because we knew how to do it. How to separate communities, how to steal children from their families, how to take language away from people, how to get people off their land, how to break culture. The fact that some people have sexualized violence as a piece of this, that gets to be a bigger dramatic story that gets picked up by the media, as if what happened is a couple of the teachers there lost the plot and a couple people got hurt. That's kind of systemically, that can get us off to think that there might just have been a couple of people, as opposed to thinking about the fact that this was institutionalized to do exactly this, to destroy families, destroy culture. So while that's a really important story that's told, it's really important that that doesn't become the only story, and we have an issue as if some people had a poor moral judgment. This was not moral judgment. This was a plan to destroy stuff, and it did it really effectively. And as we know from, I work with survivors of torture from all over the world, sexualized violence is a fabulous way to destroy men, women, families, everybody. People do it because it's useful. We know that.
About 20 years ago, I wrote an article where I talked about how manipulative it was, what the government did to our people and the church. And oh my God, I got so many emails, and people were really upset, and I got to a big argument with a government official. To this day, I can't remember who he was. He wasn't someone like really big, but he got red in the face because he was arguing it down, and that it was done with intent, but he ended up, I thought he was going to have a heart attack, but I just kept my stance, and when it comes to sort of that kind of a situation, something clicks and I come on. But yeah.
Mona, did you want to say something connected to this? I was going to ask you guys both about